The success of his first feature, Hard 8, had enabled the young director Paul Thomas Anderson with access to development executives at New Line Cinema, who wanted to help him make his follow-up. With these powerful forces at his side, Anderson looked to his 1988 short, The Dirk Diggler Story, for inspiration in creating the backbone of a new feature. He fleshed this little nugget of an idea out into Boogie Nights, a sprawling meditation on the San Fernando Valley's pornography industry over 2 decades of success and upheaval. Boogie Nights begins amidst the glittering disco lights of 1977, before the specter of AIDS took away the notion of free love without consequences and spurred heavy government regulation on the porn industry. Despite dealing with such lurid subject matter, Anderson manages to find a peculiar kind of dignity and grace within his characters. He shows us that pornographers are people too, just as capable of real love as we are. Before Boogie Nights, Mark Wahlberg was simply known as Marky Mark, a young rapper with a few unimpressive film credits to his name. But the role of Eddie Adams, stage name Dirk Diggler, established Wahlberg as a genuine acting force that persists to this day. Burt Reynolds is inspired casting as Jack Horner, a director of Exotic Pictures and the patriarch of his own little porno family empire. Like John Travolta and Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, Reynolds' against-type performance resulted in some newfound cultural relevancy after a long spell of waning popularity, eventually culminating in an Oscar nomination for his performance. Ironically, Reynolds reportedly hated the character and didn't get along with Anderson during filming. He even went so far as to fire his agent for recommending the role to him. Julianne Moore counters the two-fisted machismo of Wahlberg and Reynolds as Amber Waves, Horner's wife and a mother figure to Dirk. She's heartbroken over her real son being taken away from her by child services, so she turns to Dirk for a surrogate relationship, one that becomes incestuously sexual. Moore turns in one of her most poignant performances here as a conflicted, inherently sad woman with deep reservoirs of unconditional love, walking away with an Oscar nomination of her own for her efforts. Boogie Nights also establishes Anderson's close-knit repertoire of performers, actors who have come to regularly appear in his films throughout his career. These include Luis Guzman as a nightclub owner and porn star wannabe, John C. Reilly as Dirk's doggishly loyal friend and co-performer Reed Rothschild, William H. Macy as the disgruntled, cuckolded assistant director, Ricky Jay as the droll cinematographer, and Philip Baker Hall as Floyd Gondoli, a smug rival of Horner's and the personification of the encroaching malevolence of videotape. On the female side, there's Melora Walters as a sweet and naive porn actress, and Heather Graham as the plucky, somewhat ditzy roller girl. Further rounding out the cast is Don Cheadle as urban cowboy Buck Swope, Thomas Jane as cocky bad boy Todd Parker, and Bob Ridgely, who starred as Jack Horner in The Dirk Diggler Story, and makes his last film appearance before his untimely death here as the Colonel, an eccentric dandy and a financier of Jack's films. And last but not least, there's the late Philip Seymour Hoffman, Anderson's closest acting collaborator. Hoffman leaves behind an enduring legacy of masterful performances, one of which is found in Boogie Nights' Scotty J, a sexually confused and awkward boom operator who carries an unrequited torch for Dirk. Boogie Nights is the work of a young, ambitious filmmaker with bottomless reserves of zeal and talent. The tone is a distinctive blend of the multiple perspective affectations of Robert Altman and the volatile kinetic energy of Martin Scorsese and Jonathan Demme. Hard 8 cinematographer Robert Elswit returns to shoot the film in the true anamorphic aspect ratio of 2:35:1, achieved this time via actual anamorphic lenses, and not a workaround like Anderson and Elswit had done for Hard 8. Bob Zambecki's authentic period production design never reads as over-the-top and kitschy, instead popping from the frame in appropriate blasts of psychedelic color. The brilliant performances and Anderson's bold narrative are aided by a constantly moving camera that glides through the various scenes like an unstoppable roller coaster. Even from an early age, Anderson has utilized the camera more confidently and audaciously than any of his peers, effortlessly mixing Steadicam, dolly, and handheld shots into a coherent whole. Anderson's use of the Steadicam in particular is worth noting, choosing to cover many of the scenes in long traveling shots. The most notable of this is Boogie Nights' opening shot. We start on a neon marquee flashing the film's title, and then crane down to reveal a lively street scene that establishes both the setting and the time period. Then, without skipping a beat, the camera operator steps off his platform on the crane, and then enters Guzman's nightclub as Anderson introduces us to all the major players of the story in one unbroken take, a la Altman's iconic opening to the player. Of course, all this virtuoso camera work wouldn't be nearly as effective without editor Dylan Tichenor to stitch it all together. The film runs nearly 3 hours long, but it feels half that length thanks to Tichenor's breathless pacing and exuberant sense of energy. A major commercial selling point of Boogie Nights was the music. Specifically, the glut of 1970s and 80s pop hits that likely moved more copies of the soundtrack CD than the actual film itself. Anderson's ear for music is spot on, using several well-known cues in interesting ways that sell the authenticity of the period. Characteristic indulgence of the era is reflected in the glitzy needle drops, oftentimes creating an association between song and picture that becomes forever joined in the mind. For the score, Anderson recruits Hard Eight's Michael Penn, who bases his musical palette around an inspired conceit: a circus. The film opens against black with a somber dirge that sounds like a sad clown flailing around under the big top, a theme that reprises itself later on as a motif signifying Jack Horner's little family unit. The strange, carnivalesque nature of Penn's score reflects Anderson's bizarre, yet touching display of humanity, while highlighting the hidden similarities between two decidedly different, performance-based occupations. Several of Anderson's thematic preoccupations are present here, coalescing into an identifiable set of tropes. As a member of the first generation to come up under the rise of video, Anderson's incorporation of the medium is more involved than any other filmmaker of his ilk. In Boogie Nights, the arrival of the video format itself becomes a major plot point, throwing the porn industry into a state of massive flux, and becoming a fulcrum for conflict between Reynolds and Hall's characters. Videotape highlights these two characters as ideological opposites, fighting a war that pits economics versus artistry, a conflict that can be argued to encapsulate the film industry as a whole. To the characters of Boogie Nights, video is a harbinger of doom and betrayal. Its arrival coincides with the fall of Dirk Diggler and Jack Horner, the fallout on their professional and personal lives being akin to a devastating meteor, or a nuclear bomb. Boogie Nights shows remarkable prescience in its insights into video's role in the motion picture medium. We're still having the film versus video argument today, although now the two mediums are virtually indistinguishable from each other. Because Anderson's films very rarely have life or death stakes, the driving force in the emotional drama stems from the theme of family, specifically the threat of abandonment or loss. Boogie Nights places this dynamic at the core of its story, presenting Horner's filmmaking crew as a legitimate family, sharing in each other's little life moments and cheering them on at weddings and award shows. Anderson also shows us how Dirk Diggler's abandonment of his adopted family leads to ruin. At the end of the day, he saves himself by crawling back in shame to Horner's patriarch figure. In ending his story in this fashion, Anderson has created a prodigal son fable for the 20th century. It's a parable that illustrates the conceit that tragedy will ultimately befall those who choose to permanently turn away from family. Anderson's films often set their stories in his home state of California, and Boogie Nights, perhaps more so than his other works, could not have taken place anywhere else but the Golden State. The San Fernando Valley, just north of Los Angeles, has served as the epicenter of the porn industry since its inception. Just like porn plays the red-headed, swept-under-the-rug stepchild to the Hollywood film industry, so too does the valley sit offset from Los Angeles, stigmatized and dismissed because of its sleepy, suburban airs. Like it or not, the porn industry is very much a part of Southern California's cultural heritage, so who better to paint its portrait than Anderson, the great cinematic chronicler of California himself. Boogie Nights is also perhaps the most frank look at another of Anderson's key recurring themes, that of sexual dysfunction. Hard Eight and Boogie Nights both flirt with sex as a paid profession, with the former's emotional tension stemming from the troubles of Gwyneth Paltrow's weary hooker Clementine, contrasting with the latter's celebration of sex on camera as an act of liberation and expression.
It's gonna be great. Jack, yeah. Do you want me to use a Spanish accent?
This also highlights a strange double standard when it comes to paid sex. The presence of the camera, for whatever reason, is the final arbiter between what is legal and what is not. The characters of Boogie Nights come to depend on their sexuality, as if it were a drug. Towards the end of the film, Dirk Diggler is back to where he started, reduced to jerking himself off in front of strangers for a couple bucks. For others, like Cheadle's Buck Swope, their past as porn stars hangs like a noose around their necks, impeding their progress in real-world pursuits like starting a family or taking out a business loan. Boogie Nights caused quite a stir when it was released, with high praise from prestigious film festivals like Toronto and New York, leading to 3 Oscar nominations, one of which being a screenplay nod for Anderson himself. The film was a breakout hit, its success arguably fueled by a bout of 70s nostalgia that was pervading pop culture at the time. Thankfully, Boogie Nights' legacy has outshined the trends of its day, enduring to become one of the best films of its decade, and ensuring Anderson's future as a major new talent on the scene.